Hi guys, welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be revisiting the Supermassive Games series because I want to talk a little bit more about a video I made back in December where I ranked all of the Supermassive games against each other. If you haven't already seen that video, by the way, there should be a card popping up in the top right for you right about now, and there'll be a link in the description to the video as well. Basically, in that video we talked a little bit about Until Dawn, and I gave it a lot of praise as being one of my favorite games in the Supermassive franchise. And I was super excited to play the remake of it that released back in October. Sadly, my December didn't really go to plan, so the playthrough ended up being a bit delayed, but I have finally gotten around to finishing it, so I want to talk about it. So this video is going to be me sharing my thoughts about the Until Dawn remake and seeing how it compares to the original version. Of course, everything I do talk about in this video is just my opinion, and I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on the remake as well. The gameplay shown in the video is, as always, from my own playthrough of the game as well, so if you would like to see that whole thing, I will also link that playlist in the description for you as well. But without further ado, let's get into the video. So I want to start this off with a bit of transparency. When they originally announced the remake of Until Dawn, I was Team Doubter. I didn't think the original needed a remake at all. It looked fantastic still, it played completely fine, and it was really cheap to pick up. I was a little bit worried this was going to become a situation like The Last of Us, where they almost just do a graphical port of the game and then charge like $100. And in my defense, the original is still a fantastic game. It does look completely fine, and if you can't afford the new version of Until Dawn, you're not really going to be missing out on anything by playing that PS4 version. And the remake is, unfortunately, over $100, but this time it's not just a graphical upgrade. They didn't just add ray tracing. They did actually basically completely rebuild this game from scratch, and they have changed a little bit about it as well, so I was a bit more optimistic going into the remake. So with that out of the way, I want to ask, is the remake a better experience than its predecessor? And after finally giving it a playthrough, I think that my answer is yes. Now, I'm not going to bother getting into the story and the plot of this game today. I've already spoken about that before in my full Supermassive rankings video, and if you're watching this video today, then you are probably already familiar with the story of the game anyway. So I'm just going to focus on the comparisons and the improvements between the original version and the new version. So we're going to start with the easiest comparison to make, and that is talking about the graphics. Now, of course, having the game remade for a just better performing engine overall, it is going to look a lot better. The game takes advantage of things like the PS5's ray tracing really well, and you can really tell when you look at certain shots side by side just how much of an upgrade this game has had. And again, this is by no means saying that the original looks bad, but you do really see the differences putting them side by side like this. I also don't know if they have redone the character models, but it looks like some of them might have had an upgrade. A lot of the characters, especially the girls, just look crisper and sharper, and especially like in the hair, you can tell that things have been tweaked a little bit. I think probably the most obvious example of this is looking at Sam. She looks a lot different than in the original. I'm also not entirely sure if they've redone any of the motion capture or the facial animations, because some characters I feel like do look better, but then other characters still look a little bit uncanny. Another main visual change that they've done is with like the camera and the cinematic scenes. Lots of locations had the camera angles like almost entirely changed. I wouldn't always notice this straight away, but when I did pick up that something was different, you can definitely tell that it just looks a lot better in general. I feel like a lot of the new shots and the camera angles do just completely change the atmosphere of the location and the interactions between people, and a lot of the scenes felt a lot more anxiety inducing because of this. They've also added in just a couple like entirely new scenes and interactions as well. Some in particular that I really noticed was right at the beginning of the game where the friends are all setting up for the prank. They give you this little like behind the scenes almost of everyone like getting into the closet and getting the camera ready and seeing Hannah like work herself up to going and seeing Mike. And when all the characters are like sleeping as well, someone's drawn over Chris's face with a Sharpie. And later in the game, spoiler alert, when Josh explains how he executed all the, I guess, pranks and everything that he did, you almost get like a little flashback to him actually preparing all the traps. It just made a lot of the characters feel more like actual people and the interactions between them a lot more genuine. And some of the little just extra scenes I think were a good supporting role in the creepy atmosphere that the game has. The Dr. Hill sessions, especially with Josh, were always a little bit uncomfortable. I feel like that character was specifically made to make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. But now some of the new camera angles of him like getting right up in your face and everything, it makes him seem a lot more intimidating. And just the whole vibe is so much more unsettling, I think, than it was before. And lastly, probably the next biggest change is just with how the game controls in general. The camera's been altered a lot more to feel like the other Dark Pictures games and just third-person horror games in general, whereas the camera sits more behind the shoulder of the character rather than almost like a fixed camera floating perspective. It actually did take me a second to get used to originally, but once I realized like what they were going for, it did feel a lot more natural to maneuver than the original game. You had less of those instances where your character would do like a quick direction change in between camera angles. There was the occasion I did still have trouble like interacting with objects in the environment just because you're not like precisely in the spot it wants you to be. You're like just a millimeter off standing in the correct spot, but that's kind of a thing with all of the Dark Pictures games anyway. Also, just quick on the topic of interactions, the accessibility like features within the settings menu, there are just so many options. They've always been very customizable with things like their QTEs and things, but I feel like they added a lot more. Like the settings menu was so big. There's so many like options for subtitles and the QTEs and just like the HUD appearance in general, which I think is really nice. And of course, a quick honorable mention to the new soundtrack. They have redone some of the scores for this game. And while I don't necessarily always pay attention to the music in games, like I have a lot of other things to focus on, like not dying, but there were occasions where I did notice that they'd added in like more ambient noise or changed the music a little bit for these moments, and I did think it was nice. Probably my only real complaints with this game that keeps it from going above the original for me is just a couple of those minor glitches. Again, having some trouble interacting with objects occasionally is still present. There were also times where some of the textures didn't seem like they'd been upscaled in the same way as other parts of the environment, and they just looked a little bit flat. And I also had an issue with subtitles sometimes. They would just disappear off the screen before the character had finished talking. I'm not sure if that was just a me thing or if other people have experienced that as well. But again, very minor things. They just unfortunately do keep it from topping like a 10 out of 10, but it is definitely still on par with the original version. So, overall, do I think the Until Dawn remake is a worthwhile game to play? Yes, I do. I think if you are a big fan of the original, it is definitely worth playing just to get a feel of the improved features, and it really does make you feel a lot more anxiety all over again. And if you are a new player as well and you want to get into these Dark Pictures games, or you haven't played Until Dawn before, I think this is definitely the definitive version of the game and the one you should play if you can. But I do know that the price point is a little bit steep, especially when that PS4 version is so cheap and accessible. So I do definitely understand if a lot of people are going to wait for a sale to check this one out, but I do still think it is worth a pickup either way. Does the remake of Until Dawn, though, make the original obsolete? Now don't get me wrong, the original is, again, still one of my favorite horror games, like, ever. And I think if you could only play that PS4 version, you're gonna be completely fine. But if I did have to pick between the original or the remake, I would probably have to pick the PS5 version. But that is all from me, so let me know what your thoughts on the Until Dawn remake are in the comments. I definitely really enjoyed playing through it again, and all things considered, I don't think the remake was a terrible decision. If you enjoyed the video as well, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to help support me and see more videos of mine in the future as well. But until next time everyone, stay safe, have a wonderful time zone, and goodbye!